Hey everyone, today we're going to tackle something that sounds super complicated but actually affects every single one of us, the US federal budget. We are going to break it all down, how it works, what the big fights are really about, and why it matters to you. Let's dive in. So, picture this. You've been planning this trip for months. You finally get to Yellowstone National Park. It's October 2013. You're all set for an incredible adventure. But when you pull up to the gate, you see a sign that just says closed. What in the world is going on? Well, the reason is pretty wild. The entire US federal government had literally shut down. For 2 whole weeks, national parks and a ton of other services were just closed, all because lawmakers back in Washington, D.C. could not agree on a budget. And that right there shows you just how high the stakes can be. To really get what happened there, we've got to connect a few dots. So we'll start with why Yellowstone was closed. Then, we'll zoom out and look at the budget as the nation's wallet. After that, we'll see how it's used to steer the economy, why it's not always a precise tool, and finally, we'll get into the big debate. Should the budget always be balanced? So yeah, that political fight in D.C. had very real consequences, like you not getting into Yellowstone. So what is this budget that can cause such a massive standoff? The easiest way to think about the federal budget is just like a giant national wallet. You've got money coming in, and you've got money going out. If you can get your head around that simple idea, everything else starts to make a lot more sense. And that flow of money brings us to 2 terms you hear all the time. If, in 1 year, the government spends more money than it takes in from taxes, that's a budget deficit. But if it brings in more than it spends, that's a budget surplus. It's that simple balance, or, imbalance, that drives the whole debate every year. Now, you've probably heard this a million times. Government spending is out of control. It's just getting bigger and bigger. But when you actually look at the numbers, the reality is, well, it's a bit more complicated than that. See, if you stop looking at raw dollars and instead measure government spending as a percentage of the entire US economy, what's called GDP, the story totally changes. For most of the last 60 years, federal spending has been incredibly stable, just hovering between 18 and 22%. So the real fight isn't just about growth, it's about priorities. So where does all this money go? Well, if we look at data from 2019, about 60% of it goes to just 4 big things: Social Security, healthcare programs like Medicare and Medicaid, national defense, and paying the interest on our national debt. Everything else, education, highways, national parks, all has to fight for a piece of what's left. And on the flip side, where does the money come from? It's actually pretty simple. The huge majority, we're talking over 85%, comes from just 2 places: the income taxes that individuals pay and the payroll taxes that you see taken out of your paycheck to fund Social Security and Medicare. Okay, this brings us to a really, really important point: the difference between the deficit and the debt. A deficit is a 1-year thing. It's like borrowing 10 grand for your first year of college. The debt, though, is the grand total. It's all those yearly deficits added up over time. It's the $40,000 you owe after you've finished all 4 years. So the budget is about paying the bills, but it's also way more powerful than that. The government's ability to tax and spend is what economists call fiscal policy, and it's the main tool the government has to try and steer the whole economy. Okay, so let's say we hit a major problem. The economy's in a recession, businesses are laying people off, and unemployment is shooting up. What can the government actually do about it? It can pull out a tool called expansionary fiscal policy. Basically, it does one of 2 things. It can cut taxes, which leaves more cash in your wallet to spend, or it can directly increase its own spending on things like roads and bridges. Either way, the goal is the same: pump more money into the economy to boost demand and help create jobs. All right, but what if you have the complete opposite problem? What if the economy is overheating? Everybody's spending like crazy, and there's so much demand that prices for everything are going up and up. That's inflation. In that situation, the government can do the exact reverse. It uses what's called contractionary fiscal policy. It can raise taxes or cut its own spending to pull money out of the economy. The goal here is to reduce overall demand and cool things down to get inflation under control. So it sounds kind of simple, doesn't it? Economy's slow, you hit the gas. Economy's too hot, you tap the brakes. But in the real world, it's just not that clean. This tool has some pretty big limitations. One of the biggest issues is something called crowding out. Think about it. When the government needs to borrow tons of money for a stimulus, it's competing for that money with private businesses and regular people. That competition can actually drive up interest rates, making it more expensive for a business to build a new factory or for you to buy a house. It can end up slowing the economy down, which is the exact opposite of what you wanted. And then there's the problem of time. So much time. First, you have the recognition lag. It can take months before economists even agree that a recession has started. Then the legislative lag, the political wrestling it takes to get a bill passed, the same kind of gridlock that shut down Yellowstone. And even then, there's an implementation lag. It takes even more time for that money to actually get out the door and be spent. By the time the help arrives, the problem might have totally changed. All of these issues really lead to one big takeaway, which an expert summed up perfectly. Trying to fine-tune the economy with fiscal policy is like using a blunt instrument, more like a club than a scalpel. It's powerful for sure, but it's not precise at all. And all of this leads us right to the final and probably the most heated debate of all. Should the government be forced to balance its budget every single year, no matter what? I mean, it sounds like a good idea on the surface, right? You and I have to balance our checkbooks. We can't spend more than we make year after year. So why shouldn't the government have to play by the same rules? But most economists will tell you that a strict, mandatory balanced budget every year would actually be a disaster. Why? Well, for one, it would force the government to do the exact wrong thing during a recession. It'd have to slash spending or hike taxes, which would make the recession way worse. And second, the government needs to be flexible enough to handle huge unexpected emergencies, like a war, a natural disaster, or a pandemic. A rigid rule would tie its hands when we need action most. So, in the end, that's the fundamental question at the heart of all of this. It's not really a simple debate between being responsible or irresponsible. It's about how we define responsibility. What is the right balance between managing the economy in the short term and making sure our finances are healthy for the long term? There's no easy answer, and it's a debate that affects every single one of us.